Creating HG, the Narcissistic Psychopath at School, Part 5. Hello, I'm HG Tudor. To enable you to understand narcissism and psychopathy, I share certain details about my life with you. And in this series, I've been taking you back in time to my school days. So far, I've been focusing on my period of time at secondary school, as opposed to sixth form, college, primary school, or university, but I shall address those in due course. And I'm going to continue with some recollections that have taken place from my secondary school. We return to my third year, which, at the time, would place me around the age of 13 or 14. I think at the time I will have been 14. In the first 3 years of school, certain topics were compulsory for us to study. English, maths, biology, chemistry, physics, history, geography, and so forth. This also included topics which were not necessarily seen as the most academic, but were more skill-based, namely metalwork, woodwork, and what was known as technical drawing. I found the technical drawing interesting. I also liked the teacher. He was a genial man who let us get on with it. And because I enjoyed drawing as a whole, this bled into finding technical drawing interesting also. Metalwork and woodwork, not so much. Whilst there was opportunity for skullduggery, given the closeness to certain implements and tools, I largely regarded the topics as not particularly worth my while, as they wouldn't be things that I would see as appropriate in my continuing education. This tended to be the prevailing attitude of my stream. Naturally, I was in the top academic stream within the year, and for the most part, many of the boys in the class found that woodworking, in particular, was not something that they deemed would be anything that their careers would go near. The girls did not study woodworking. They went and did home economics and needlecraft and such like. It was that type of school. In the course of woodwork, it would be the case that the teacher, we shall call him Swampy, would regularly halt what we were doing and ask us, "Have I shown you how to hacksaw?" There would be a groan from the class as we'd all go, "Yes, sir." He already had done so. And then he would instruct us to gather round whilst he showed us how to do it, once again, seemingly completely forgotten that he had shown us how the hacksaw ought to be correctly utilised. "Lads, have I shown you how to use chisel?" he would say, in his strong regional accent. "Yes, sir," came the wearied response. Gather round," he would suggest, as we would all traipse towards the front unit, and he would then demonstrate to us yet again how to correctly use hammer and chisel. It was tedious, and in order on one occasion to defeat the tedium and entertain my fellow classmates, I decided that I would launch what would look like an attack upon Swampy. We all had access to large wooden mallets, and in the course of him demonstrating another technique which he had probably showed us before, I took up one of the mallets and pretended to strike him on the head from behind. I must admit, the temptation to actually strike him and shut him up as he blethered on about a joint or more in relation to chiselling, etc., was particularly strong. Nevertheless, I recognised that that would then lead to particular complications for me within the school, and managed to rein in the impulse to strike him. Instead, I decided that I would pull a comical horror face as I then pretended to bring down the hammer upon his skull. I envisaged it dinting and denting as the wooden face of it hammered against his skull. What I had not taken into account was the fact that Swampy was able to see me in a corresponding window, beginning my comical assault upon him. That was a useful lesson learned, and ever since I've always been mindful of the impact of reflections in glass, in metalware, in mirrors, and have used it to my advantage, and also to ensure that I'm not detected in certain things that I do. But on that occasion it was quite literally a schoolboy error to engage in the supposed hammering of Swampy's head, whilst enabling to see me doing so in the reflection. He spun and took me by the hair just next to my ear, where it's particularly painful when tugged. "What do you think you're doing, boy?" he announced as he turned on me and gripped that part of my hair. I issued a noise of protest. "Nothing, sir," I replied. "Didn't look like nothing to me," he said. There was a silence amongst the rest of the boys. They had been laughing, of course, when I had commenced my supposed hammering of Swampy's head, but now they were waiting to see what punishment would be sent my way. "Didn't right sneaking behind teacher," he admonished. "Shouldn't be behaving like that, Tudor." "Is it the same as sneaking around smoking behind a cupboard?" I replied defiantly. At that, his eyes opened. Swampy loved smoking. One of the things that he would often do before he would start a lesson, not realising that perhaps somebody had entered the classroom already, was to have a crafty cigarette. The way that his desk was arranged was that he would have a desk at which he would be sat, and then he had two tall cupboards either side of it, which in effect shielded part of his part of the room. Accordingly, he could go and stand behind one of these cupboards, open the doors, and effectively render himself invisible, apart from the wisp of smoke that would be rising from above his head. Naturally, if one entered the classroom quietly, one could stand and watch as the greyish smoke went upwards and he enjoyed a crafty cigarette before the commencement of the lesson. On numerous occasions I would be stood there, watching as the cupboard door would close, and they'd go, "Oh, Tudor, didn't hear you come in." "No, sir," I would say. I would maintain my fixed gaze upon him, letting him know, without letting him know, that I was aware of what he'd been doing. Naturally, on this occasion, as he held me by the sideburn, he glared at me as a consequence of my observation about him lurking smoking, which was clearly something he ought not to have been doing, and something that could land him in trouble. Furthermore, I hated smoking. It was something that I've always detested, and particularly when it came to kissing women, that where they tasted of smoke, I really did not find it attractive. Naturally, I would press on, needs must. But people smoking around me, the stink that was left on one's clothing, I found particularly irritating. And naturally, with Swampy, a heavy smoker, his clothes stank of the stuff, his fingertips were yellowed, and, of course, his breath clouded with the recent tobacco as he admonished me. My riposte in relation to his lurking caused him to reconsider matters, and he let go of me. I rubbed at the offended error. "Get back behind desk," he suggested to me, as I moved away from behind him to stand on the other side of the unit where he was engaging in his demonstration. I caught the eye of a couple of my classmates who smiled encouragingly, recognising also what Swampy did with his smoking. I stood, however, annoyed at having been detected and at his attempt to humiliate me by admonishing me in front of the rest of the class. This would not do, and it would be necessary for me to cause a problem for Swampy. Immediately my thoughts turned to burning down the woodwork room, but I thought that would present too many difficulties. I thought about smashing up his car, but then I thought, actually what I would hit is the thing that he loved the most, smoking. It was clear he couldn't get through the day without having several cigarettes, which at that time was acceptable for him to do so at break times. But such was his level of addiction to tobacco, it was necessary for him to smoke during classes, something, of course, which the headmaster would not approve of. Thus, we would see Swampy pulling up in his car, cigarette in mouth, then lighting another as he then walked into the school in the morning. You would see him on a break time strolling around, particularly if he was on yard duty, smoking. And one, of course, had caught him on numerous occasions smoking in the classroom, needing that crafty cigarette to see him through the day. Accordingly, on another occasion, I deemed that it would be appropriate to attack that love of his. At lunchtime, the order of those that were allowed first into the canteen alternated. And on this particular occasion, my year group were allowed in first, which meant that we were in there straight away, dining, whilst also the teachers were in there dining, which enabled me to know that Swampy would not be in his classroom. It was also the case, of course, that the classrooms were locked, and therefore I wasn't going to attempt to get in through the door. But I knew that there was a window that was loose. The woodworking room was on the ground floor of a particular wing, and I knew of which window was vulnerable, but with a certain shove, the catch could easily be encouraged to move, and then one could climb in through the window. I ate my lunch at pace, and then said to my friends that I had something to do. I left the canteen, headed along the long corridor and out the doors at the end. There was nobody around between two of the wings, and the woodworking room was on the other side, bordered by trees. This enabled me to go about what I needed to do unseen. With it being lunchtime, the teachers were either in the staff room or were chowing down themselves, and it was left to the dinner ladies to patrol. They were less mobile and less interesting, tending to stand in one place as they would survey the yards. I knew, therefore, that they wouldn't be wandering around between the wings, but rather they would attempt to stop somebody on their way there from the yards. I wasn't heading there from the yards, I was heading there from the main building, and thus they wouldn't be looking out for anybody there. This enabled me to reach the woodworking room undetected. I got to the window and gave it the requisite shove on the outside. The panel slid across, the weakened catch giving way, and I was in. Window duly opened. It was easy enough for me to clamber in and then scurry straight over to where Swampy's desk was. I opened the cupboard, and there they were. 2 cartons of Benson and Hedges cigarettes. I thought about stealing them and selling them to the smokers on the yard, but decided it would be better to leave him with something that would cause him dismay. I therefore opened the first packet, which had already got 4 cigarettes missing, leaving 16 behind. I broke them all up into small fragments and scattered them inside the cupboard. I then took the second packet of cigarettes and did the same. Thus there was a mound of unsmokable and ruined cigarettes. It might have been possible, perhaps, to have gathered the tobacco and formed it into a roll-up, but he was somebody that was lazy and preferred his cigarettes to be pre-formed for him. Instead, there was a mound of broken cigarettes, testament to his addiction, and very amusing for me. Job done. I ensured that I washed my hands in the sink, ensuring that there was no smell of tobacco on me, before clambering out of the window and sliding it shut behind me. I then returned to the main part of the school and then walked down, entering the yard as if one would do normally, so as not to arouse any suspicion by appearing from the relevant wing. Later that day, we had a woodworking lesson, and accordingly I entered in an unassuming fashion. It would be soon seen that Swampy was in a particularly foul mood. Naturally, he didn't let on to anybody what had occurred, but his short and abrupt nature and the fact that he didn't interact with the class much at all, just setting us a task and not once inviting us to consider had he shown us how to hacksaw or how to hammer or how to use a chisel, was testament to the fact that he was basically in one great big sulk. It was most satisfying, and I spent the afternoon trying to catch his eye, to give him a smile, to let him know that it was me that had done it, without him being able to prove that it was me. He may well have had his suspicions as a consequence of our earlier run-in, but the fact is, he never said anything to me and sat there like a slumped figure, disgruntled and annoyed at the loss of his cigarettes, which was hugely satisfying for me, providing me with negative fuel as a consequence of his reaction, and the satisfaction, of course, that somebody who had sought to cause a problem for me had indeed been vanquished. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.